The Russian invasion of Ukraine. First and foremost, my heart goes out to all of the people of Ukraine, the lives lost, the displaced families, the heroic men and women forced to fight off this unprovoked attack, and to all the Russians on the other side who didn't want this war, which are the ones suffering the brunt of all the sanctions imposed on Russia, the embargoes, frozen bank accounts, etc., because of Vladimir Putin's actions. My heart goes out to each and every one of them. I, like many other ignorant Americans, don't know much about Ukraine. So when this situation began popping off, I started asking myself the obvious questions like, why Ukraine? Why now? From Putin's perspective, what does he have to gain aside from the geographic territory? Like, what are the other angles at play here? So I started looking into it a bit, looking a few things up that I'm going to share with you guys today. And I remember just a few years back where Russia did the same type of thing with Crimea, which I learned was part of Ukraine. So I'm just like, what is it? What is it with Putin? Is this just his MO? Stir up some shit every once in a while, take some land? So anyway, I looked into it. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you guys is from a great Ukraine timeline that I found published by Cairn University. And I'm going to link to it in the episode notes in case you guys want to check it out, because it's a really long timeline, but I'm just going to highlight a few things related to what I was looking for, like the deal basically between Russia and Ukraine. Like, what's going on there? What's going on with that beef? In 1922, Russia and Ukraine are two of the founding members of the Soviet Union. In 1949, post-World War II, NATO was formed. NATO is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which is an intergovernmental military alliance of 28 European countries and 2 North American countries, being the US and Canada. So NATO was formed in 1949 with 30 countries, 28 European countries, 2 North American countries. Fast forwarding to 1990, and again, a lot of shit happened in between that you guys can check out in the full timeline, but I'm just highlighting some key points here. In 1990, Ukraine, which was not part of NATO, by the way, Ukraine declared independence from the Soviet Union. So up until that point, they were still part of the Soviet Union. In 1991, Ukraine votes to make itself officially independent, and the Soviet Union dissolves. And when the Soviet Union dissolved into Russia, Ukraine, a bunch of other Eastern European countries, now Eastern European countries, a year later in 1992, NATO started contemplating adding some of those Central and Eastern European countries as members of NATO. Because what NATO is essentially is this alliance of countries that was agreed upon by obviously all of those countries, but Russia and other countries in the region as well, as like a peaceful, okay, you guys have your clique of countries over there, Russia's over here. We have a buffer in between of like neutral countries that aren't in technically with either side. So you have like that geographic buffer of these, Central and Eastern European countries. So it's all good. But again, in 1992, NATO started contemplating expanding and adding those Central and Eastern European countries as members of NATO. And since the end of the Cold War, NATO has added 14 new members. Now, what this does from Putin's perspective, and I'm speculating, but he must see this as, all right, you guys had your NATO clique over there. We all agreed, this is how everything's divided up. But now you guys are expanding eastward towards Russia, and Ukraine is right on the border of a bunch of NATO countries on the western side, like Poland, Hungary, Romania. And on the eastern side, Ukraine's border is with Russia. So Putin's like, yo, you guys are pushing up close to my territory over here. And geographically, like all those Eastern European countries, like in between, like they share history, obviously, right? With Russia, they were all part of the Soviet Union. Cultural ties and historical ties, obviously. And the eastern part of Ukraine is more like pro-Russia. The western part of Ukraine is more pro the US and Europe, the West. Now, in 1994, after, again, the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine is left with the world's 3rd largest nuclear stockpile, which I had no idea. And then there was something called the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, which was a treaty where Ukraine agreed to trade away intercontinental ballistic missiles, warheads, and other nuclear infrastructure in exchange for guarantees that the three other treaty signatories, which was the US, the UK, and Russia, will respect the independence and sovereignty and the existing borders of Ukraine. So that was the deal. Ukraine was like, look, we're going to stay neutral. We're cool with you guys on both sides, but we're not joining any sides here. We want to be neutral. Here's our nukes. We all agree this is Ukrainian land, sovereign land. Leave us the fuck alone on both sides. Then fast forward to 2008, and this is where I feel Putin started like fucking up, because he had kind of like a logical argument before in terms of, you know, we all agreed that these were what the territories were, but you guys started expanding and saying that I can't expand. And I think he also wanted Russia to become part of NATO, but NATO has always said no. So it's kind of like, all right, I can't join you guys either. What the fuck? And you guys are expanding? But check out what he does. In 2008, Russia invades Georgia, which is another nearby country. And the way they did it is pretty much the same strategy they used when they annexed Crimea and the same strategy that they use now in invading Ukraine, which was they identified pro-Russian areas within Georgia, because again, all these countries are part of the Soviet Union. Many still have like Russian ties, dependent on Russia for oil, etc. Which I also found out Russia's like one of the largest oil and gas exporters in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia, which I didn't know. But going back to 2008, so they identified these pockets of pro-Russian support within Georgia and decide to invade Georgia on the pretext that those pro-Russian areas should be considered sovereign. And as such, Georgia is technically occupying sovereign Russian states. And they went in on that pretext in 2008. What kind of gangster ass shit is that? That's like me going into a bank and saying, hey, the money in that vault is pro-Tony. It supports Tony. And this bank is holding it hostage. So I'm going into that vault and taking ownership of that vault and all the contents within it, because you, this bank, is holding it hostage. Well played, Putin, you sick fuck. Then fast forward to 2010, the Parliament of Ukraine voted to abandon NATO membership aspirations, because apparently there's like this whole like lengthy long process to like be down with NATO. Then in 2014, Crimea was invaded by Russia. Again, same pretext. Russia and Putin identified Crimea as pro-Russia, and technically Ukraine was occupying sovereign Russian, a portion of Russia, and they annexed it in March of 2014. Annexed it, meaning aka took that shit. Then in April of 2021, Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, urged NATO leadership to put Ukraine on a timeline for membership. They're like, right, now we want to be down. Let's fast track this shit because this crazy fuck Putin is plotting something. Now, this next piece is from a Wikipedia timeline leading up to this current invasion, which I also linked to in the episode notes. But I'm going to read an excerpt directly from there. So this gets us from April 2021, where Zelensky was urging NATO to join, to the current invasion. In November 2021, the United States reports unusual movement of Russian troops near the borders of Ukraine. By November 28th, Ukraine reports a buildup of 92,000 Russian troops. On December 7th, 2021, President Joe Biden warns Putin of strong economic and other measures if Russia attacks Ukraine. On December 17th, 2021, Putin proposes limits to NATO's activities in Eastern Europe, such as prohibition of Ukraine ever joining NATO, which are rejected. So Putin made a few key demands, and that was one of them, which is stop expanding NATO and never let Ukraine join NATO. That's his claim to fame. That's his main gripe there. Then on January 17th, 2022, Russian troops began arriving in Russia's ally, Belarus, for military exercises. Belarus is, again, one of those countries right there, right on that border. I think it shares a border with Russia, Ukraine, and Poland, if I'm not mistaken. On January 19th, the U.S. gives Ukraine $200 million in security aid. On January 24th, NATO puts troops on standby. January 25th, Russian exercises involving 6,000 troops and 60 jets take place in Russia near Ukraine and Crimea. And on February 10th, Russia and Belarus begin 10 days of military maneuvers. And on February 17th, fighting escalates in separatist regions of eastern Ukraine. So again, this eastern part of Ukraine, which is more pro-Russia, had a few separatist regions, a couple regions that were pro-Russia. And Russia used that, again, as the pretext of these are sovereign Russian regions, and Ukraine is technically occupying them. So we're going in to free them, basically. Now, so in terms of why, that's one of the reasons why, that geographic aversion to allowing NATO to pull up to its border from Russia's perspective. But I also saw this really great video. Shout out to Kyle Kalinske, who recommended it and previewed it on one of his pieces. It's a video called Why Russia is Invading Ukraine by Real Life Lore. It's very detailed, great visuals, has a ton of information, and highlights, again, a lot of things that I didn't know. So if you want to know more about this and the history of Ukraine, and again, why Russia is invading Ukraine, check out this video, which I will link to in the episode notes. And one of the areas that the video shines, in my opinion, is in the coverage of the oil angle. I mentioned earlier how Russia is one of the largest exporters of oil in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia. I think it makes up 30% of the country's GDP, or like 60% of all its exports, like some crazy shit like that. Like it's a petro nation. Like that's its main thing. It's like more than its main thing. Without that, it would be a very different country. And Russia, aside from being a main exporter of oil to the United States and other countries around the world, it's like the number one main exporter of oil and energy to Europe, which is right there, right? Especially Germany, which has the number one economy in Europe. And there are several pipelines from Russia to Germany and other parts of Europe. There was, that's the case now. There's like 4 or 5 pipelines of oil, like how the oil gets from Russia to these countries in Europe, or the main one go through Ukraine. So Putin tried to lower the dependency on Ukraine and like go around Ukraine. But Ukraine also discovered under its land huge deposits of natural gas. And in the past, Russia and Ukraine beefed about the gas prices that were, again, flowing to and through Ukraine to get to Ukraine and also to the other countries in Europe. So it was always like some static there, which is why Putin scaled back that dependency on that one pipeline and is building the others, etc. And in 2014, around that time, Ukraine established a development deal. Sounds like some Hollywood shit, right? With the Shell Corporation to mine and develop the shale gas, natural gas that's under their country. And it was a deal worth like upwards of like $10 billion. And it would make Ukraine a major competitor to Russia in terms of gas and energy, especially in that region in Europe, which would obviously hurt Putin and be a devastating hit to Russia's economy that's so energy dependent. And I thought that was a really interesting point of view that I just really hadn't heard before. So again, I really recommend that video for you guys to check it out. Again, it's called Why Russia is Invading Ukraine, and the video is by Real Life Lore, Lore. And just a couple more things on the situation over there in Ukraine, which is I gotta give it up to the people there, from President Zelensky, who's out there literally on the front lines, to other like famous Ukrainians like Vladimir Klitschko, the boxer. I saw him give an interview to a reporter on the ground over there, you know, with a bulletproof vest on, weaponed up, fucking Ukrainian beauty queen, I think, or something like that. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what her name is, but the same. And like the government did like some sort of like emergency constitutional like rule change or something like that, where they're allowing literally any and every Ukrainian that wants weapons, that wants to fight, to go fight. You see grandmas with fucking machine guns, kids of a certain age, men, women, you know, no real military training, but just like fighting for the country. And that it's heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time, if that makes any sense. And even some of the stories that are now coming out as like fake or propaganda, or people are saying it's from like different times, and you don't even know like what to believe anymore. But even those are fucking inspirational, you know, like you want to believe them. Like there was one with a grandmother that was supposedly walked up to a Russian soldier that was occupying a town there in Ukraine, and she was like, "Here, take these sunflower seeds and put them in your pocket. Put these sunflower seeds in your pocket." And he was like, "Why?" And she was like, "Because when you're dead, at least sunflowers will grow through your corpse, will spring up from the ground from your corpse," or like some crazy shit like that. And that story is like under contention. Like some people say it's a bogus story, and that's not what she said, etc. But who knows? Or like the story of the Ghost of Kiev, which was like a fighter jet plane, like Top Gun type cat that supposedly himself took out 6 Russian enemy fighter jets. That story I've heard everything from, no, it was more than 6, to the other end of the spectrum of Ukraine doesn't even have fighter jets. Like wild shit. But regardless if those stories are real or fake, the situation is real. What the folks over there are going through is real. And, you know, I wish them strength to get through this shit, and hopefully calmer heads will prevail. Now, my initial like knee-jerk reaction to why isn't the U.S. like just running up in there and fucking like regulating shit? And it's like, you know, really is that we want to get into like another war like immediately like that after finally scaling back Afghanistan? And also just like that technicality fact of the Ukraine is not a NATO country, and we are fucking expanding, you know, NATO is, but your initial like knee-jerk reaction is like, yo, just go like fuck them up, you know? And you always hear this thing about sanctions and embargoes and like stuff like that. And it's like initially, like when that was the response, it was like more sanctions. Come on, sanctions don't fucking work. Clearly, I feel like Russia's been sanctioned forever. But again, I don't know exactly how sanctions work and stuff like that. But I learned through like this situation that there's degrees of sanctions. There's a sliding scale of them, and it's meant to, you know, intensify and have stronger and stronger deterrent effects, which seems to be happening. And I hope that's the case. I mean, the Russian stock market as of today is down like 40 to 48%. And that was like in a day or two after like the quote unquote SWIFT, which I think is an acronym for something, I believe, SWIFT level of sanctions that were imposed. And the fact that other countries around the world, the UK, imposed like their set of sanctions. Switzerland, which is like known to be neutral and known to be like fucking, that's where drug kingpins, you know, you see in all the movies, they go get Swiss bank accounts because that's where they could like hide their money out in the open. Even they literally froze the bank accounts of all these rich ass Russian oligarchs, which is like the ruling class, as well as Putin's account himself, which is unprecedented. So it's like the world is like really rallying, and they are in essence cutting off their money supply, which again sucks for the Russians that didn't ask for any of this shit. The Russian people didn't ask for the government to do this wild, crazy shit, because they're suffering on their end. They're going to suffer the brunt of this. You know, I'm sure all those rich fucks have, you know, ways to get what they want, but the actual like people on the ground and the kids, I fucking can't imagine. But it's definitely not as weak of a response as my initial reaction was, or at least as my initial like reaction thought that it was. President Biden in his State of the Union speech, which I actually just listened to, had a lot of strong, tough, encouraging words backing up these decisions, and also added now stopping flights to and from Russia, and really reinforced all these severe sanctions being imposed. Now, the last thing I'll say is that I like and am surprised, but I like what I'm seeing from like some corporations that are stepping up to the plate and independently following suit with like cutting ties with Russia and like doing business as usual. Delta Airlines was the first one that I saw that severed ties with Airloft, which is a US-based, Delta is a US-based airline, and it announced that it was suspending its code sharing agreement with Airloft in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And that works as like they were kind of like in Airloft, Delta, Aeromexico, and like a couple others. They did this like code sharing thing, and they were like each other's arms in, you know, different regions. Not sure exactly how that works, but like when I heard the news, I thought it was more of, you know, Delta just like canceling all flights and, you know, declining to do business in Russia. So it's a little less of that, but more just like severing ties with their affiliation with Airloft, the company that does travel within Russia. So it wasn't as impressive as I hoped, but it's something, right? I always expect corporations, which is like my biggest gripe with them, to just aimlessly go in the direction of where the money's at, as opposed to taking an actual like moral stance if it's going to cost them. But this next one I'm proud of and gave me a bit of hope that others will follow suit. The NHL put out this statement, which I'll link to again in the episode notes if you guys want to check it out in full. Here's an excerpt from it, where they said, the National Hockey League condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine and urges a peaceful resolution as quickly as possible. Effective immediately, we are suspending our relationships with our business partners in Russia, and we are pausing our Russian language social and digital media sites. In addition, we are discontinuing any consideration of Russia as a location for any future competitions involving the NHL. And I absolutely applaud the NHL for doing that. And it's not nothing. You know, the NHL has a lot of Russian players. A few of their like big stars come from Russia. That's a stance they didn't really have to take. You know, they could have just put that like first piece out if they wanted to say anything and just hope for a peaceful resolution, et cetera, but not actually immediately suspend their relationships with their business partners, which is going to cost them money, and going the added extra steps of pausing their Russian language, social media, digital sites, etc. Like, that's admirable. That's what you want in a united front against a common enemy, a common, clear, fucked up aggressor, right? Just unfortunately, that's not what we've seen historically from many companies. And my hope is that when and if China makes a play for Taiwan and taking back Taiwan, which is something that I believe was like foreshadowed by the joint statement that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin put out, where they put out an open letter and they criticized the United States several times within it, but they had like this alliance, quote unquote, type meeting. As soon as I saw that, I was like, all right, stuff is bubbling up around Ukraine. They're going to either bluff something in Ukraine or do something in Ukraine. And at the same time, China's going to try to take back Taiwan just to like destabilize shit even more. And I still think that's something that's going to happen. But when and if that does happen, I hope that all of these companies and folks that have financial interests in China that constantly bow down again to the money and put that in front of morals and what's right, I hope they keep the same energy that the NHL is showing now with Russia. I don't want to see any fucking John Cena speaking Mandarin apologies for saying the words, the country of Taiwan and blah, 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 and passing, and then China saying, hey, yo, you guys want, WWE, you guys want us to show the WWE here in China to our billions plus people? Have your boy John Cena issue an apology saying that Taiwan is not a fucking country. Hey, John Cena, Fast and Furious 9 made $160 million in the box office, $100 million of which came from China. You want your next movie to be shown here in China, or you want us to fucking not show that shit at all? And you bow down. And when you follow the money like that, when that's like the main thing above all else, it's like, come on, man. That's such a clear weakness that they're exploiting because we let them. You know what I mean? We'd be so much stronger as the people here, US, Americans, Westerners, etc., if it wasn't for that. The NBA, saying we stand with Hong Kong, etc., when China was fucking up and arresting protesters. But a few NBA players spoke out about it. China said, yo, we're your X amount of percentage of your market share for the next decade. The growth that you project to your shareholders is contingent on us. Shut your fucking athletes up if you want to continue that relationship. Then everybody flips. Everybody follows suit. Yo, LeBron, you want our very cheap child and damn near slave labor to produce the Nikes you like selling so much? Tone it down on your pro Hong Kong shit. And they all just bound down. Marvel fucking Studios. Here's another one. In Doctor Strange, that like white lady monk kind of chick that's in it that like teaches Doctor Strange the way. In the actual comic books, it's a Tibetan monk. China also has a beef with Tibet in the same way of like Hong Kong and Taiwan and shit. And since they have financial interests in all our cultural businesses that they can exploit, like studios in Hollywood, they were like, yo, you guys want this movie to show in China, in our billion plus people market? Just tweak the script a little bit. Instead of making it a Tibetan monk, make it this like yogi white lady. and we'll be all good. It's a little change. It doesn't, fuck with the story too much, right? It's fucking gross. But I digress. I hope these companies that can keep the same energy when the time comes. And I applaud companies like the NHL, Delta Airlines, and others that are putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.